Hello everybody. Welcome to the LJLOU, bringing you that LJL coverage of Spring 21, Spring Split Week number 7, must one here, initialize in the center, Nightmare on the other side. Gentlemen, first game, last game of the regular split for Spring. Are you excited? First things first.
Man, yeah, it's almost over for Spring Split, which is kind of crazy. Playoffs are looming. There's so much still on the line, and I'm pretty excited to be kicking it off in the way we are.
Absolutely. This is going to be a hype one, and Nightmare, Detonation FocusMe V3 Esports 1. This one isn't actually even our game of the week, and there's been countless surprises already.
There have been, in true LJL fashion, everything is still open. There are some teams which have locked playoffs, and they haven't locked their position. That does mean that there's still a lot to play for the bottom end of the table. We can have tiebreakers pretty much anywhere in the table as it stands, and I can't wait for it.
Yeah, this is going to be a very important one. Obviously, V3 Esports looking to try and maybe have an opportunity to knock Rascal Jester off that second place spot still. We've got Detonation FocusMe looking for that one more win, which will secure them that first place spot. Like, just from a standings perspective, initialized, there's so many things that could change.
There definitely are. It's starting to get very close, and particularly for two kind of sections. We've got a group in that sort of top 4 where there is a potential for a couple of tiebreakers. And then, as we've kind of mentioned, there is this last, so important playoff spot that is on the line. That's kind of why our match of the week isn't DFM versus V3.
So, gentlemen, we've already talked about this match in at least some capacity over on our podcast, which if you're not listening regularly to and you want LJL action, you should definitely be finding that out information in Twitter land or Discord or wherever you find our content. Honestly speaking, YouTube, it is also there. V3 versus Detonation FocusMe. Now, assuming that this is going to be the standard roster that we're expecting for Detonation FocusMe with Arya and Kazu in their respective roles. Gentlemen, where do you think this match is going to really be played around for both these teams, as they have rather different playstyles and attacks to the opening parts of the game?
I think that as opposed to last season when it was V3 with Paz and we saw obviously the legacy DFM roster, I think we would have almost certainly see things played around that bot lane and having people like, drafting stuff like the Aphelios Thrashers they were so famous for last year. And having the rest of their laners try and work appropriately around that, understanding that they can turn up to a fight at any given time. This year with Cog, particularly coming into the lineup and being a secondary carry threat, which V3 are not necessarily used to having in that role, it changes the matchup dynamic quite a lot, particularly since Ebby, even though he does have ridiculous stats and is one of the best top laners in the league, doesn't look quite as infallible as, say, his 2020 spring self. I reckon this is going to be a far-ranging top-to-bottom skirmish, melee, brawl, whatever the other Smash titles are. There is no Smash skirmish, I'm aware.
Smash,
but,
Ultimate, Melee...
all of those things.
Yeah,
well, welcome to Super Smash LJL, because it's coming right at you.
I mean, Nintendo, it's Japan. It all kind of works out in that way. I mean, one thing that I think is very interesting, and I think speaks to both of these teams, initialize, if I can come over to you, is their average game time that these two teams have is vastly different. Over on V3 side, it's 35 and 27 seconds. So it's 35-30, we could call it, average game time. Detonation FocusMe, finishing on average every single game 5 minutes faster at 30 minutes and 36 seconds. Again, let's just round that up so it's 30-30. Those are some surprisingly different two game times. And what do you think this really speaks about these kind of teams when they are ahead and when they're also behind, and kind of just the tempo of the games that they're a part of?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because obviously DFM have only dropped 2 games. V3 have only dropped the 4, so these guys have been on the winning end of most of their matches, DFM particularly so. And I think that has shown out at least a little bit in some of those games. V3 are a little bit slower, possibly towards the late game, a little bit more methodical. Whereas there is definitely an element of that Cloud9-esque, that G2-esque style on them with the gold lead. DFM have been exceptionally ruthless.
Comparisons of these again,
I
sir?
know, I think we may have made these before, but I think probably because they do to an extent stand true in that you have got a lot of very mechanically talented players who are willing to go for the outplay and the outplay champs. Notably in the solo lanes. And that has occasionally come with people going for plays and them falling flat on their face, which is, sometimes what happens. You pick Aurelia and you end up in the top lane and find yourself versus 3 people occasionally, or whatever, or particularly for Ebby in this case, the Akali or what have you. But what that tends to mean is DFM have been very, very aggressive with the gold lead. V3 have been a little bit more stable with it, I think, to turn it around for V3. And that has its own strengths, but it does mean that sometimes they haven't stretched some of their leads quite as aggressively as they could have.
Okay. So Nymera, coming back over to you, let's look at some of their past match results. We only have one game size, obviously, for this one, but obviously you remember DetonatioN FocusMe won this game, but V3 got first blood. V3 got first tower. DetonatioN FocusMe, however, got first dragon, but V3 got the first herald. First Nash went to DetonatioN FocusMe, and obviously from there they were able to get the first inhibitor. They had the most gold, but obviously the kills for them that game was only 3 difference. It was a very wild game, to say the least, between these two teams. What do you think of some of these early factors? Obviously, the early game was more V3, but then when it came to push and shove, DetonatioN FocusMe's decision-making really got them that win.
For sure, this is where our narrative for DFM and their team fighting prowess has really come from, right from those early weeks, saying, okay, sure, if you let them into the game post 15 minutes, there's a good chance that they're just going to out-team fight you for the win. That's kind of what happened in that game. Kind of happened in their first matchup versus Rascal Jester too, when they were coming onto the scene this split and coming out to a really strong performance, much stronger than we would have expected. So I'm looking at DFM right now. If they are going to come out with the roster that we expect them to, with Aria in the mid lane and Kazu in that support, as opposed to having Seros and Gang, I think that we will be seeing more of that team fight style, just saying, all right, we'll try and tide things over in the early game. There's a chance they lane diff, if they just lane Kingdom too, right? If we're actually looking at the last 5 games played between these two teams, DFM have an average game time of 26:41. It's not even up at that 30-minute mark. That's like almost 3.5 minutes quicker. They are absurdly fast. They are the fastest team in the LJL when they are on an absolute tear. And right now, discount that one loss with their other roster. They're looking on fire, Lexi.
So, if this DetonatioN FocusMe roster is looking on fire, and outside of a minor misstep, one could argue, with playing the older roster and not bringing the new talent that's been working with Aria, do we actually think anybody can beat DetonatioN FocusMe if they are this good? If they don't ever play their old roster, is there any way to stop them initialize? And if there is, how are they going to be stopped?
I think the
Hot
answer to that is
questions, hot takes
definitely
only.
I think yes, and I think honestly, Jesters or V3 have good shouts at doing it. Hell, I'd even give it over to Sengoku, and I think largely that is through 2 things you can do. That is attacking that bot lane, and Kazu in particular, because he is still not Gang. He is a coach. Yes, he's an ex-pro. Yes, he's still got some skills in there, but he has overstepped more than once. The other way is just take that gauntlet the DFM throw. They will come in with an arrogance and a swagger, and that's what's making them so entertaining this split. But if they are going to draft Lucian Akali into whatever you pick, you could draft around that. And it's been shown before. Yes, it was, also obviously the likes of Rascal Jesters, when they did beat DFM, it was the other roster, but they kind of went a little bit nuts out of the bot lane. Sol was a monster. Did 1200 on DPM that game. Then you look over to their other loss, and that's a bit of the drafting thing that maybe you could get a hold of, because DFM are going to draft to be a little bit of an outplay.
And that's the thing for me, is that actually there's an arrogance to DFM's roster right now, which maybe leads them into a couple of pitfalls. I mean, we could say the same about a number of historical teams. I mean, heck, even our Samsung White roster of 2014, standing there thinking, oh yeah, there is a way to beat them. Hope they end up beating themselves.
So we've just been informed by our producer, gentlemen, that we're going to be seeing Syros be playing.
Okay.
Oh.
This is
So
a pretty big game for that as well.
it's a surprising one to see them bring that in. And this is obviously against V3. Do you think they're trying to just run the gauntlet and get more practice for Syros in case they need to bring them in for this one? Let's bring the official stream stats actually on screen, Reed. Thank you, Mr. Producer Man in Producer Land. These stats are wildly different. Obviously, we're using only one game
poor old
stats for
Syros.
Syros.
Wow, that's terrible.
I mean, his DPM stat looked pretty good, second in the league, but again, that's only off the one game sample size. The KDA is not great, but again, we just mentioned Sol ran over everybody that game, so yeah, interesting to look at. I'm not sure how what's the word, reliable those stats are off the one sample size for poor old Syros.
So, like, let's just think about it, though. Syros versus Ace in summer 2020, because that's the most recent time. Ace actually came out on top overall in that matchup, you could argue.
They won they won the split, so you gotta give it somewhere.
They did, and his mid lane presence is one of the factors that got V3 that win, with him almost being Boogie's squire, one could argue, always there by their side, always there to back them up. Nightmare, what is your thoughts on this?
So I mean, I've tended to be the person pushing this narrative of, okay, Ace does well in team fights and skirmishes, but he can end up, you know, losing you a bit in that laning phase. That's not really been the case in this spring split so far.
Really?
He's often, he's still going towards similar picks to what he was going in 2027, but even when he's been going as some of our better laners in the league, off the likes of our Arias, and I guess in this split, people like Nation too, Ace has been doing admirably in those matchups, maybe getting slapped around the walls. Players did teach him a couple of things in that laning phase. Well, it's one way to learn, right? As painful as it may be. And I look at this now and I'm thinking, all right, on the other side, bringing Syros in, who's had one game of experience this split, a bit kind of wet around the ears after being put through the washer and last summer by V3 and crew, even though DFM did have that almost miracle run to go through the entirety of the playoffs bracket. Okay, all right, a chance for Syros to say, all right, this split is ours again.
Is this split still Syros's, or is it DetonatioN FocusMe's new blood that is coming in and changing it up? Gentlemen, I want to quickly take it down to the bot lane, because we know, before we get into this pick and ban phase, it's an important topic for us to talk about, because this means we'll have Utapon and Gang facing off against Hollow and Reiner, and obviously we've had very high compliments towards Reiner for most of this split. He's only been having a few issues sometimes, and that would be obviously an interesting conversation around Hollow and Reiner and their kind of coordination that they've had in the bot lane. But the matchup, that's the far more important thing. And how do we think these two bot lanes are going to match up?
This is the all-star bot lane that DFM have been, have basically paid a lot of money and put a lot of hope on. This is the last piece of Exodia, right? Obviously, we're only looking at the right leg right now. The other parts of the body aren't quite there. They've removed the head of Exodia to stick in their old, I don't know, like a Karibo's a road leader called Saris, because he's still all right. But the point is, they've not got Arya in there. But this is kind of a bit of a look at someone like Gang, who has been so damn good. And yes, Hollow and Reiner have been playing pretty well, honestly, this split, even if there's been once or twice when they've been attacked.
Initialize, I have to knock you off here because, gentlemen, we have entered the pick and ban phase. So, Nightmare, I would like to hear your thoughts, and obviously I'd love to hear both your predictions while you're in that pick and ban phase. Reed, take us over.
Thank you so much. Lexi, pick and ban. The last part of Exodia on a bit of a micro scale down in the bot lane for DFM, who are on the blue side, whereas V3 are over on the red. And that means it's Ebby, Steel, and for the second time this split, Syros in the mid lane, Utapon at AD carry, and of course, Gang, said piece of Exodia, in support.
And on the other side, I suppose we've got Obelisk that, I don't know, there's not really another multi-part thing I can think of, but I was just going to go for something kind of cool. Back to my Yu-Gi-Oh days. Anyways, Kog'Kog, Muujin, Ace, Hollow and Reiner for V3, looking to take down the regional rivals of DFM.
Regional rivals, indeed. We've also got to talk about some interesting bans out here. Renekton and Narm perhaps make sense for DFM, but the Nocturne is a little bit more of a bold one to have in your first round pick. Indeed, and then the other side, it is Udyr and Olaf away from Steel, who has honestly been fantastic on those champions, frankly, along with the Seraphine, which is just very strong right now, flexible, and that's leaving DFM to consider their first pick, and they've gone for the Rel for Gang.
They have done, and I look at Gang as a player, and I think this guy has been such a playmaker. His Rakan is maybe his most famous pick. He's had some Leona games to die for, and the Rel coming in, and this split as a new champion is not something which Gang, not a champion which Gang has had much chance to show their stuff on. On the other side, we've seen this a couple of times in a couple of other regions, but Jinx is being picked up in the LJL.
Oh, yes, it has. It's the first time we've been seeing it a couple times today as well, apparently. And it's just one of those picks. I know has seen some buffs. It's kind of been hovering around the meta over since these new patches come in. Of course, we're on 11.4. So I'm very excited to see what the pairing for DFM will be. They've gone towards the Tristana. Utapon has done a lot of work on this champion. He's got a hold of it. I'm thinking back to the game versus CGA, I believe, where he and Kazu, on this exact pairing, ran over the game.
They did. That was a game which ended in 21 minutes and 43 seconds. Utapon ran away with that game. That was with Kazu, of course, in that bot side. But we know that Utapon and Gang have been the premier bot lane pairing for the LJL for a great many years at this point. Having this kill lane versus Hollow and Rhino, one of the bot lanes to be feared in the LJL in their own right, means that, okay, eyes are going to be drawn inevitably down towards that 2v2. Hecarim might be trying to join that party, though, as Steel has that champion for himself.
Indeed, that means the cavalry has been summoned. We've got Rel and Hecarim leading the charge. Tristana might be following up with a little bit of hopping and at least keeping pace with said Stampede, but we'll have to see whether it all works out, of course, for DFM, because there's still a chance for V3 to answer. And Azir has been the choice for this one, another backline DPS option, backing up the Jinx, and two very big scaling choices for V3.
So Ace, not the most notable Azir player, but it's still one of those control mages which the LJL has just continually loved because of its ability to make plays. I mean, I think of our players like Pyrion, who's outgone from the region now, and I don't know, even our Arias of the region kind of sat there thinking, yeah, okay, I don't necessarily want to give up my solo carry opportunity, but I still need that scaling control mage aspect. Azir has been the go-to for so many LJL players, and Ace now picks that up.
And would it be the LJL if we didn't have at least one or two Heimerdinger bans? There it is. It's off the table, as is the Zillion. Seros having his champion pool tightened a little bit, whereas DFM are focusing towards Muujin, who has pulled out things like the Kindred in the past. It didn't work out last time for Muujin, but the early game was still pretty strong for this guy, so I can see where the ban comes through. That leads me to believe it'll probably be another jungle ban here for DFM.
Suppose it has to be. There's always the chance that you ban away something in towards that top side. And the Nunu instantly locked in for Muujin. Tank, early game pressure from the Nunu. The power spike of those scuttle probes. These fights around scuttle probes are now infinitely more important because as soon as they're on the map and controlled by the Nunu, the move speed he gets towards his snowball means that the side laners of DFM, that bot, well, any lane, let's be honest, has to play so much more defensively.
Indeed they do, and Seros might be looking towards an old favorite of his. It will be the Ziggs locked in. Unless there's some real craziness going on with some flexes for a Ziggs Rel bot lane and Tristana mid, but that would not fit the narrative I have for these players. So the assumption right now is likely still Tristana Rel. I've got to think about what Ebby wants to go for in the top side. Camille is currently being the hover, but the likes of GP has also been thrown up along that with that Gragas, which does appear to be the final option. So it'll be Gragas top side to mound out with this potentially slightly more aggressive bot side of the map for
There is something I respect about the confidence at how quickly Hollow locked in that Nunu for his jungler. So it's like they're thinking, oh yeah, these bans coming through. Bam! There you go. There's your Nunu. So for those of you who've not seen this champion be played a lot, honestly, it is, again, the power spike of Nunu is the early game ganks onto these lanes using the snowball, and the move speed you can get off the scuttle crab, which then, of course, impacts that that snowball, rather, to get into these lanes very early into the game and upset someone like Ebby, who has been caught out once or twice in the laning phase in those 1v1s, and maybe upset someone like Seros on this Ziggs, because we know that Ziggs is not the most confident early laner.
No, I think that's probably fair to say, and of course, with the way it's all been set up, we know, of course, that Nunu, with the consume, with the clear speed, with the snowball, it's just really fast, really obnoxious. And if he can start clearing away those scuttle crabs and using those speed runs to start zooming around various lanes, could be a little bit of a difficult time for DFM. We've now got our drafts locked in, and I think whereas DFM have got a little bit more of an engaged presence to them, or at least I say that, and I look at Nunu and going, well, that's not similar in terms of running at people, but there is that kind of Rel and Hecarim go in, Tristana tries to jump in and follow up alongside the Gragas with Ziggs throwing in what he can with the ultimate, whereas I guess my read over V3 is a little bit more front to back, keep the Jinx and the Azir safe.
So I think one important thing is that the LJL has often gone towards the combo of Azir Tristana. So once you get to level, I don't know, 14, 15, later than that, you have such a long-range backline that, and in this game, supported by another LJL staple of the Scion, it means it's very hard to reach the backline, and they'll just outrange you, and playing against such a large range disparity makes things very difficult for the side of, well, for the opponents in those games, right? Having the Jinx locked in, Jinx is a champion which has had a large amount of changes recently, has larger range on the rocket form when you get up towards that level 9 mark, and then, of course, scaling up with your items later into the game, means that DFM are suddenly thinking, all right, how do we reach this backline, and how do we do that through a Nunu Scion?
All good questions to be asking, and at least they've got some options because, of course, Rel, Hecarim, and Gragas all have quite a lot of target access. Hell, Tristana as well, if she gets to free fire, can definitely make even these frontliners' lives a little bit challenging. Of course, Ziggs with his range has options, but you're right, it's not going to be easy, and you know, you've got a Thresh to keep Jinx's lack of mobility pre-getting excited kind of a little bit less of a problem for the Jinx. You've got the Azir, of course, got his own mobility, and even beyond that, you've got a Scion who is probably the beefiest of beefcakes to be a frontliner alongside Nunu, who's not exactly a lightweight either. There's definitely some heavyweight muscle to hold the front line for the side of V3.
Of course there is. On the other side, at least, so one of the big combos that we saw for DFM and this roster out of last year was the likes of playing stuff with their Ziggs and stuff like Kiana jungle, being able to pin someone in place with a large amount of CC, and then finish off that kill with the likes of the Mega Inferno Bomb. You've got Rel, who has that CC ability, and then Steel on the Hecarim. I wonder, actually, with those combos, if we do see Steel getting very far ahead, whether that combo is enough to carry DFM to a victory by just picking off Ace and Hollow with the CC combos.
Yeah, maybe that is the way. You have got the combos there, but of course, I still think we do need to be touching a little bit more on potentially what are you expecting out of this Nunu in the early game? Because obviously, like you said, probably Scuttle Crab contention is likely the way forwards, but at that point, is it just repeatedly gank bot as often as you can?
I don't know if it's always gank bot, because again, we saw the likes of Kog'Kog get caught horribly out of sorts versus Sengoku in their one game versus them the other week during Super Week. And if you can just get across the map and get something working, any of these lanes with a lead can be very impactful for V3. Because again, it's not just getting this Jinx ahead for V3. If you have Ziggs, if you have Ziggs behind, or if you have Scion ahead in this mid and top lane respectively, those teamfights again very difficult for DFM to work out. DFM want a stable early game. They want to make sure that this Nunu isn't impacting these lanes. So for me, I'm looking at Steel to battle ward out Muujin as opposed to Muujin. Well, if you get what I mean. Steel has to be the person making sure that Muujin isn't wrecking the early game.
Okay, so that is on Steel. He's done it pretty well before. He's here on a Hecarim as well, which is a relatively aggressive carry pick as well. If you can hit that Trinity Force on a nice decent clip, no puns intended, Hecarim can definitely run over this game, which again, no puns intended. That was just supposed to be a straight sentence.
Yeah, try and walk straight as well, or gallop straight. Look, anyway, many movement puns to be had. We do have junglers starting on the same side of the map, so there is that chance that we do see a scuffle at Scuttle at that 3-minute 15 mark. Ebby gonna do his special and maybe get something going at level 1. Yeah, go for it. Free auto attack, free body slam, and he's got the grass, so he's just gonna wait for that to charge up too.
He is. He's going to just do the auto attack. This is just Ebby's thing. Level 1s are always so obnoxious with this guy. At least Cog does get a decent decimating smash to try and trade things up. But there's the grass proc you talked about. And now Cog actually is in a lot of trouble. I don't know how easily he wins this early on, especially with where the wards are at. But the decimating smash comes through, gets a certain amount back. And that is our number 1 and 2 CSD top laners at work.
This is the classic Ebby. For those of you who didn't see much of this player, if you're tuning in for the first time, Ebby is a player who loves his level 1 to level 2 stars, where he zones people off with CS. He's going to take a tower shot for it there. Probably going to eat a Q in return. So actually, Cog doing a good job of using his level 1 ability to make sure that the HP trades aren't going completely one-sided. Question is actually if any XP was lost during that trade. One thing that Sam's been pulling up a lot about Ebby is the fact that even though his CS stats are not great, he does make sure that the enemy top laner has even less CS than he does.
And it absolutely shows, because you look at the gold difference and the CSD, even the XP difference at 10 as Gang goes in looking for the mount up and knockback. They do get the attract repel. Reiner gets the flay down, and just a nice attempt on that level 2 engage for DFM, but can't find too much HP traded particularly heavily on both of these support characters, actually. Pot's being blown by both a little there, but Steel is coming down. Be on a ward as well. And, there is a snowball. They might be trying to turn this around onto the hair crimp. I don't know how easily that will be. And Steel just turns around and tanks it, because why wouldn't you? And it's just more time, though, because Reiner goes in super low. They got a knockback flay, and the Ignite is there as well. Not quite enough damage. Aftershock is enough to get Reiner out and alive. And here comes the teleports in, I think, towards mid lane. Yeah, Ace going to come back in and just help try and contest for these Scuttlecrafts. But here comes Seros, here comes
just
Steel.
Used a snowball. That could be a
and he
problem.
did use... And that's the minefield thrown down as well, and they're going to have to back away and give up this early Scuttlecrab. And you called it early. Scuttlecrab contention was always going to be a little bit spicy in the early game.
It's the new power spike. Because of his reliance on Musi, top lane going in favor of Ebby. Finally managed to outplay one or two of those Qs, I suppose. Is he going to try and in fact, he is going to try and stop the back. He's walked around. He has his Q available, trying to punish Cog, I suppose.
Just throws that ward down as well and buy as much time. Oh, that's so... I know he doesn't quite get the time right for the ward, which is a bit frustrating for Ebby. He wanted that back to come through. It will force teleport to the wave and potentially could try and get onto Ebby, who he's now backed away. And Muujin, on vision, takes a bouncing bomb to the face. And that'll be about all she wrote for now. And early on, things have been a little bit spicy, but nobody has died. Things are relatively even. And that's kind of all she wrote.
Honestly, one of the things we've talked about between these two teams is a difference, though, as much as we can say some similarities in terms of, oh, they can carry out of any lane with these rosters and whatever, is that DFM have often laid back in the early game, and they've not been as prepared as your Rascal Jesters or your V3s of the LJL in this split. This game, though, seems like DFM have been prepared. They have been playing around this kill lane of the 2v2, and they're trying to nullify the early game impacts of this Nunu and what it can have. What we saw in that last play was 3 summoners blown by both bot lanes. The hook of onto Tristana out of the air, cancelled out by that cleanse, trying to look for that last auto. Another auto would have led to Reiner dying. It would have been extra damage on the bomb, extra auto attack damage too. But the exhaust came through. Reiner saves his own life. It got very close in the 2v2, though.
Did get close indeed, and has potentially led to a bit of an awkward back in some ways for Utapon, and there's been a hook onto Gang, but here is Steel. They're playing around the bot side. It jumps in Utapon. He does get flayed back, but there is a devastating charge that comes through on a Reiner. They can't quite find the last auto, though, and he'll stay alive, but it does force Reiner out of lane again.
Huge flay once more. The jump doesn't land for the Tristana, doesn't get the extra damage on the bomb, and Reiner gets out alive. So this extra XP away from the Thresh, lane pressure away from V3, but DFM still yet to find that opening they really want. They do have themselves a sizable gold lead, though, just from CS advantages between bot and top.
They do, and this is part of the risk, right? You have may not got the kills, but you have forced people away from the waves. You've forced people out from that XP range as well. It's put poor old Rhino in a bit of a difficult spot, but he is now here, and that is a Nunu hovering up behind there, waiting to start his engines and be the most obnoxious lane ganker in the world, just flying down the lane. Rhino Hex flashes over the wall. He's going to be the gank option as down comes Mugen from the top side. There is no flash onto Utapon, but that was a nice crash down to buy space. Utapon has got himself space to get out as well with the rocket jump. Well played by Gang, by space and time. And Rhino's HP bar is right back down to sub 20%.
Exactly. I mean, the bomb trade from Utapon, and again, huge onto the Thresh, because with the Halo Blades early on, once you do have all of your basic abilities, having that Q alongside your E, importantly, to get that attack speed on those for that brief amount of time, Tristana gets to really shred through HP bars. Gang going in, flashing forward.
That will be the first blood. The kill lane gets its mark. It took a couple attempts, and here is Mugen versus Steel, but it's a level 6 versus level 5 disadvantage, and that means that Steel, who was stolen away the red buff and has got that level advantage, will steal away all those mini chickens and feel pretty happy about it. And Seros has been sat in lane feeling very happy with his XP levels right now.
Oh, okay. Gragasol used big trades.
Massive knockback, and here is Steel as well. Look for the onslaught of shadows. Doesn't even need it. Look for the devastating charge and has to use it anyway. Could be in a spot of bother, but there's just no time, no space, and the zombie won't get anything. A DFM get kills across the map.
Dude, no teleport for Sion means that he's losing almost a double wave in this top side. Mid lane been a non-factor so far. It's not like Ace can
Rhino, you can't walk in. You're 2 levels down. You're 2 levels down. It's a second kill over. He tries to face check, and Rhino, forced out of lane so much, walks back in for the 4th time in a row, and this time he dies again.
V3 out of sorts. They're not prepared for this strat. They're not prepared to have their early game nullified to this extent. V3 find themselves at a 3,000 gold deficit 8.5 minutes into this game.
And this is just such a far cry from the last week where Hollow got a pentakill. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, he did so well in the Super Week. And at this point, with the Tristana 1-0-1, 2 kills in lane, Hollow forced into a bit of an awkward position just because it's not been going that fantastically with his lane partner. That could be problematic for this guy who's on a Jinx, supposed to be here to carry. They will get first Dragon at least, but you can see that DFM have set up pretty happily to try and start up Herald in trade.
Okay, so first Dragon goes to V3, get themselves a Cloud Dragon. Okay, the ability haste on your ultimate is nice. That's definitely something you can play around, particularly when you've got your Sion probably using that. Okay, close run stuff. Using that for
closer than I anticipated. Go on.
But when you have a Cloud Dragon, it often just means you can use your ultimates if they are used for utility purpose, just that more often. That's where it often tends to be the most impactful, unless you have super long cooldowns and stuff like your Karthus ults of the games and whatever. V3 do not have those necessarily, and Cog will have to play weak side, it looks like, on this Sion 2, as Evie now has that lead, and the Hecarim is looking to once again just make sure that in one of these games the top lane is their stomping ground.
It looks like, but I mean, Mugen is around, might be looking for a gank. He's not had as many options as he might like. Gonna try and come around the side and try and find something, but Evie has a tower, and just a bit of the wave being shoved in there. And got to call out a little bit here that, you know, Mugen on this Nunu is Dancius, down the kill, down some of this interaction that Steel's had on them right now. And I do need to see a little bit more out of this Nunu pick that was picked so quickly. Looked to be something of that counter pick deliberately so for this guy. And right now, this Nunu doesn't seem to have paid off, though I grant you it's only 10 minutes in. Still 3,000 odd gold that DFM are up in this game.
I think a lot of that is just the awareness of DFM just saying, all right, we know what Nunu's going to do. Let's make sure they don't get it for free. Now we've got the Herald going into mid lane. Ace dancing around with the skill shot's not going to get chunked out. Instead, chunks out Steel in return. Nunu now coming to shield, but I think this tower's still in danger.
It's a little... Remember, of course, that Satchel plus Ziggs on towers with Herald is just a nightmare. It makes this combo very, very deadly. And it also just puts Ace in a bit of a bind as well, because leaving lane at this point will cost those last 2 turret plays, because Zig can just execute the turret with a Satchel.
So, that's the thing, both of these characters are happy to scale up. They're happy to be sat there and say, all right, okay, I'm going to get to my items. And I think right now, Ace is getting caught out a little. No, just WE's, Q, and then Q's out of the fray. But so this is now going to be a question. Okay, right, so we've got top laners with significantly less farm than most games you'll expect. Oh, the steal on blue buff Doesn't go through, actually. Mugen gets it.
But Mugen had to take it away, perhaps importantly, though. And I think for Seros, that's still a win, even if it's not as the full jackpot. It forces Ace off having the blue buff, which is kind of important. Azir without the mana sustain is a significantly less threatening proposal compared to something else. However, Steel will find himself face-checking a Nunu, will walk forward to get a bit of a heal back himself, and just auto that Nunu away from his Raptors, which have been not really his all game long.
So one of the things about Azir is that his full combo of WEQ, which is used for a great many situations, it's really expensive in terms of the mana. Now he's been chunked out, forced out, ultimates available, Ace under threat, but gets out from under his turret.
Mugen rightly hangs around, afraid of the wraparound gank, and it does ward it off, but Steel, being a Hecarim, does what he did in the mid lane a moment ago. He goes, yeah, well, this is just a drive-by, baby, and I can go on and do other things without having lost all that much time. Steel will instead head over to this red buff, but here comes Mugen. Might be looking for a bit more of a trade. He's on vision, though, still is Mugen. He's lost vision himself off this bush, and because he doesn't have anything looking like a ward right now in inventory, it could be relatively hard to steal completely blind, and it does just go down, and Mugen can't get a hold of it. And that's the second red buff in a row that this guy has stolen away. And in goes Gang on the bot side, knowing everything is, but that is the teleports back in Hollow. Still very, very low. They can't quite get the kill, though. Utapon getting jumped on, gets jumped back by the Buster shot himself, but the rocket comes through. Gang's still going to go in. It'll be a 1-for-1 right now, and Seros has teleported in, and it'll be a double for the side of DFM. The bot lane set it up in a 2 versus 3, and Seros teleports in to make sure he gets to clean up everything else. And they will now move to 5-1.
Turret, isn't it? Because Seros has this... Okay, no, actually, it's going to be Jinx sticking around. Basically, whenever a big fight happens where Ziggs is alive at the end of it, you think, all right, who's losing a turret? Because Satchel is now very, very powerful with no one to wave clear. How does this start? It's a huge level... Well, not even necessarily a level advantage, because both these supports are level 6. That means that the Magna Storm's available, though. Hollow doesn't get to put down damage. At least Reiner gets on top of Utapon. The Buster Shot doesn't come out quite soon enough to disengage Ace, and Hollow picks up themselves a kill with their respective ultimate. Seros, though, comes in really big with the teleport. Now we've got 2 kills onto that Ziggs. None picked up for Ace, sadly, so he's down 10 CS. Not necessarily a fault of his own. There's been a lot of pressure onto his lane from the accrued members of the FM in that mid lane. But now he has to sat there thinking, all right, because this Leandri's Ziggs is into the game, and I need to wait a little longer.
And that is a lot of turret play gone. I think V3's numbers might have been copied over from DFM's there, actually, so I wouldn't hold that one too preciously. There we go. That's a bit more like it. And interestingly enough, Cog did not pick up the gold for the top lane plates by the looks of it.
From Ebby.
And there is a teleport coming in alongside a Mega Death Bomb. And that will be Mugen trying to get out, but he also Shadows follows. Ebby in the back line as well. Utapon in the 1 versus 3, trying to trade out. Will get a couple back. Reiner now under turret. But here comes the rest of DFM. Sion finally looking to teleport in, but it is not before 2 members have fallen, and Reiner, unsurprisingly, this game is forced to back out.
DFM they're just ahead of the pace of this game, 1 step further ahead. And V3, that step behind Cog, looking to collect a wave in topside, not teleporting down early. So we have to see exactly what comes out here. I think one of the big problems for V3 is that they don't know where DFM have been in the last couple of minutes. They don't know where their wards can be. The Mega Inferno Bomb comes through. It takes a lot of HP bars off of V3, and it splits the team, importantly, too. Steel gets in there, starts stacking up on the Conqueror, starts getting a lot of damage. He has a Triforce already now. The next fight is going to be horrible for V3 if they allow it to happen in the same form, whereas Mugen cannot stand and be that frontline that V3 needs him to be.
He can be a wonderful emote bot, though, because this guy has been throwing out the crab raves all game long, and I don't know whether that's a little bit of tilt on his part, saying, oh, no, this game is doomed. V3 is gone, crab rave, or however this particular meme is supposed to go. But it's, yeah, you're right. It is a significant gold lead in pretty much every position. In fact, I'm not seeing anywhere where I even expect there to be a lead. Yes, Hollow has got a kill, which is fantastic for this Jinx, but it's versus 2, 1, and 3 and a slight CS discrepancy. And then you look at the other side, it's like, yeah, I've got a Ziggs at 3-0-0, who's got the turret in mid lane, is feeling very, very happy for himself. And it's getting very scary for V3, you're right, frontline isn't much of a frontline, and DFM have tank shredders anyway.
They do, and they also have, well, DFM have themselves the pressure lanes. They get to push in wherever they want. Ziggs is pushing in versus Azir. Azir doesn't really get to outplay that matchup too heavily now, since Ziggs can stand from outside of his combo range to clear the wave and potentially poke out too. And you've got this bot lane, this 2v2 of Utapon and Gang, of course, got ourselves the Australia lanes as they head up towards that top side, pushing in just relentlessly. They've done that ever since the start of the game, and can I say it is a pleasure to see Gang back on the Rift. Gets hooked up though, and look, he's just going straight in.
The cavalry is here! The turret goes down, and now the fight in the 3 versus 2 alongside a Mega Death Bomb. Or rather, is it a Mega Death? That's a Mega Death Rocket. Mega Inferno Bomb! I combined the two ultimates. That's the second time I've done it, but either way, the kill count remains the same, even if I have sort of managed to combine 2 large weapons of war. Seros still comes up with an attempt to get an assist, but everyone died before it came through, so never mind. Just throws it up as some fireworks to celebrate his team's success.
And if we're talking about champion identities, we talked about it with the Nunu and the Scuttle Crabs and how important it was that DFM understood what V3 wanted out of the early game, it's also important on the other side that V3 haven't been able to keep Ziggs away from his preferred play pattern. If Ziggs survives and isn't the focal point of so many of these team fights, often you just lose a free tower somewhere around the map. His passive, and in terms of that short fuse on his auto attack, which has so much damage against towers in general, and then having a satchel bomb too, means that V3 are now sat at a 2-0 tower advantage in this game, and having the double demolitions of Ziggs and Tristana means that it's not going to be easy for them to hold on to the rest of their towers for the rest of this game.
Yeah, that's completely true. We've talked about Tristana plus Azir being a hell of a combo, but with a 96% chance to win statistically here, they have got double demolitionist, double yordles, and another engage. This one onto Mujin, but of course Nunu is many things, but slow isn't among them. Phase rush procs, and he gets to walk away relatively scot-free. Saros might be about to get ganked though, because Ace has managed to find his way into a bush, hunting small yordles. There we go. Ryder's going to get shoved through, flash it away, tries to dash across the net, and does manage to make it out for now, but he's got no flash. He's got to try and outplay from the Baron pit. I think he's just done for here. There is Utapon though, so they're going to try to evade it back onto Mujin, and that Mega Inferno Bomb did so much damage. Good lord, Saros, he is at least trading his life dearly. Hopping in, looking for the buster shot, they make it 2, and now Jinx being dead, Reiner about to follow, and everyone else continues to run forwards. It's a triple for Utapon, who is following up on his mid laner's death with absolute vengeance. Manages to find a triple, and V3 pay heavily for attempting to try and jump onto Seros, and him buying so much time.
It's just so hard for V3 to get so much out of these fights. It just keeps going.
I shouldn't laugh at a professional game, but that is kind of ridiculous. All while V3 desperately look for a single pick. There's a Herald summon in mid lane. It gets the tier 2. It gets the tier 3. It charges onto the inhibitor, and Mujin will at least find the dignity of an execution to the bot lane tier 1.
The fact that he needs to is so difficult for V3 to swallow, though. They're sat there, and DFM have decided the tempo of this game time and time again. They're doing it through, just look at these plays. The replay comes through, of course. Saros just get hit by pretty much everything. He's stuck in the pit, and he's sat there thinking, well, I still have cooldowns. I still have myself the ability to play through. Gets a huge AoE combo, but at this point, you're thinking, okay, Ace is out of this fight. He might have to teleport back in, but there's no way that this Azir can start fighting, which means that it's mid lane for mid lane trade. In fact, he has to teleport out of all things, and that doesn't even go through. This is the thing. Saros just manages to get the huge turnaround damage, and he's very familiar with his champion. Comes out with a great combo.
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm not even going to condemn V3 for that play. It was the right idea. It really was, because they needed to find picks somewhere, somehow. Problem was, Saros slipping away for as long as he did into the Baron pit, and VFM just being so far ahead.
That's the Civ HD special, I tell you.
Oh, boy. Well done, Mujin. At least find something resembling a bit of a mind trick. Problem is, it's not going to get them all that much. They are down 9,000 gold at 20 minutes. It is an explosive lead, backed up by, well, rather appropriately, Tristana and Ziggs. Absolutely running over this game, 6-1 and 3, 3-1 and 2. Saros most farm in the game, and everybody else on the side of DFM definitely pulling their weight as well. And Gang back in the roster, pulling out some of his old tricks, his engages this game. The aggression in lane has been a treat to watch, and V3 haven't really been able to handle it as well as I think they were hoping.
This does feel like prime DFM spring. This feels like one of these teams where they just understand what they need to do in the game just that little better than you. They understand how to use their lanes a little better than yourself, and it has now got to the point where they get to run down into the base with a 6-0 tower lead. It feels like V3 have been choked out of this game right from the start of it.
Choked out, maybe about to fall down as well. Their base is broken into in the top lane. As we said, that mid lane inhibitor turret already fell down. V3, though, might be looking for the engage. They do need to find something. This might be the start. It is the 4v4, but Gang buying space in the front line is so tanky with how many assists and how much gold he has. Doesn't really take all that much damage, and instead the trade back onto Reiner there is pretty nasty from this Ziggs at 2 items plus boots.
I mean, you've got the Leandries, which gives you that extra burn over time. Ziggs with any amount of cooldown reduction is somewhat scary as well. Doesn't have those listed beats, doesn't need them. We saw what the trade looked like when he got right on top of those two when he was sat there in the Baron pit. Speaking of the Baron pit, it's going to be Baron started up for the FM trade on the other side of the map for Cog, taking down the VT's first turret of the game.
And Gang and Seros are playing the bush bait here. Crash down onto the Thresh, who dies oh so quickly. The Baron doesn't even get to regen past to half HP. And instead, V3 will try and play around Ebby, because Muchin is down there and therefore not looking for a steal. V3 have just given it up. 13 kills to 2, 7 towers to 1, 2 dragons to 1, and now a Baron to boot as well.
DFM is textbook. It's easy as you like. They use their pressure to get picks. They use that to split V3 across the map. Utapon is so irresistibly strong in this game, and he's not the only one at that point. Gang finding the engages, and Muchin caught out.
Oh no, that is so disappointing. He hasn't got flash. He's still pretty fast though, and is he going to be able to walk out this time? The devastating charge just throws him for the forwards, but there's an attract and a repel. And a Hecarim Decimate Q Devastate. There we go. There we go. Does not Rampage is actually what the Q is. There we go. I finally picked it up. Either way, it still kills the Nunu, who is slain, trying to get something back for V3.
Well, it wasn't the Rampage logo thrown up as much as that's the Hecarim ability, the Pentagram one coming out of Gang. Previous champions, and of course DFM, or previous champions themselves, looking to get themselves back that crown from V3, who are our reigning LJL champions in this split. Although right now, you wouldn't necessarily think that, because they have been absolutely put to the sword. Bit of regicide from the side of DFM.
Muchin is a very fast Nunu, though, who is now respawned. Of course, the game is still pretty early
damage.
Ebby is being jumped on by 3 people, and he's just not dying. Sorry, it made that 4 people, and Utapon instead is going to go into the backline, but he just gets shoved back. That is a well-timed Azir wall that buys space, but Utapon just flashes over and gets 2 anyway. He's got the reset, and he starts pumping out the damage onto Reiner. At the top side, it is still rampaging away versus the people into the base. Red buff claims 1 more. It was a plaintive call from Nymera, and at 24.5 minutes in, it'll be sub their average game time of 26. DFM are looking to end it all.
They've got the Demolitionist. Towers mean nothing to them, nor does the Nexus.
It absolutely does not, and Detonation FocusMe will secure first place for the 2021 Spring Split. And frankly, Nymera, it wasn't even close.
It wasn't. We saw this roster one time previously in this split. They lost to Rascal Jester. They got a bit outplayed in the early game, and Rascal Jester came out with a win there. The same could not be said of V3. DFM came in looking poised, looking collected, looking dangerous.
Well, that is a nice little wrap-up there from Nymera, but we're going to unwrap it in a lot more detail in just a moment or two. Stick around for our analyst desk, and we'll be back in a minute or so.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the desk. LJLOU bringing you that full coverage of the LJL Spring Split must-won here to break the game down versus V3 Esports facing off against DetonatioN FocusMe. Gentlemen, well, that was rather climactic, anticlimactic. A well of emotions came over me while watching that game, and I think that's a good place to start. The game started in just such a unique way early on, didn't it, Nymera?
It did, particularly because there was a Nunu in this game. That's one thing we're going to have to talk about, right? And the thing about Nunu is that you can gank the early lanes better than most champions in the game. You're sat there and kind of being like, okay, if I get scuttle crabs, things get really, really dangerous really, really quickly. And what DFM did deny the scuttle crabs coming through and making sure this Nunu couldn't get into, I don't know, stop Ebby's rampant aggression, get into this 2v2. It didn't happen. DFM controlled the early game from that.
Talk about these picks and some of the picks in the pick and ban phase. We've got Jinx and Nunu for the side of V3. Obviously, Syros went for his tried and tested and a good old friend of Ziggs in the mid lane, a special pick of his. Initialize, what's your take on some of these picks? Obviously, the Jinx we've seen before, but Nunu's definitely a pretty new to the LJL.
It made sense. We understood what the plan was, which was be another front line, be something that is irritating and can start ganking a lot in the early game, and be a good front line for these big hyper carries in the late game. Problem was, bot lane, that 2v2 kind of got jumped on a bit, which made Jinx a bit hard to get off the floor. And Nunu, Muujin was tracked the entire game. The first Scuttle Crab lost to them. Pretty much from then, this guy was just on vision, having his red buff stolen or his blue buffs Mega Inferno bombed for the rest of the game.
And this Ziggs pick has just been a tried and tested favorite of his, Nymera, but was it the pick here in a meta sense, or is it just Syros just playing Syros and the DFM parts and playing around him better than almost anything else, really?
I think Ziggs is fine. I think if you play around Ziggs like that, it's absolutely worth picking. Because if you're going to get to the point where you know that Ziggs outranges an Azir, that's often how you deal with an Azir anyway. If you think about the typical counters, it's either having someone like an Akali or a Zed even further back in time to give yourself those kind of assassination potentials. Outside of that, it's stuff like AD Varus. It's stuff like you've got the
Seros, right?
Yeah, and then you've got Seros with people like with champions like the Karma and the Ziggs
in there.
Exactly, yeah. And so what that means is that once you do manage to start pushing off the Azir from his turret, having a jungle diff as well in a lot of senses, right, still really just pushing up and taking those camps. I don't think Muujin ever had a chance to counter jungle. It means that Azir is functionally out of the game because he can't defend his turret. Ziggs gets to roll around the map, and Triss is doing fine in the 2v2 as well. DFM, again, they put together all the pieces to make it work.
But then we have to go down and talk about where a lot of the early game action happened, gentlemen, and it was around the bot lane of DetonatioN FocusMe. There was huge early game pressure. We can use the overlying term of like tempo. The early game, it was just relentless from DetonatioN FocusMe initialize, and let's use that point because Steel was everywhere. We've already mentioned that he was counter-ganking. So much of this was DetonatioN FocusMe. Where did this come from?
The right leg of Exodia in a microcosm is still the right leg of Exodia, it turns out. Gang comes in and has a stormer of a game. His rel, his willingness to pull the engage at every opportunity. There was a few summoners blown early, don't get me wrong, and Steel being around at the right time to at least shield his bot lane's aggression made things a little bit easier for them to be kind of so aggressive. But that's what I kind of want to touch on is Rel just going in constantly and bullying the Thresh a little bit. Reiner did a pretty good job of disengaging, but it cost him a little bit more every time and eventually ends up down a couple levels in experience, and DFM pounce and get the kills. Reiner walks back in. They jump on him as he goes in the bush. They try to teleport down to V3 to buy space. Utapod still gets enough damage, and Seros teleports in and gets a 2-for-1 anyway. So, like, it is one of those things where you're looking back and V3 are like, well, what more do we do? And it definitely just got a little bit punished there, and Rel is very strong, and Gang is a phenomenal player, it turns out, still.
What's your point of view, Nymera?
I think that a lot of what initially I said holds true, right? Because V3 correctly said, all right, we can't let ourselves get choked out of this game. We need to start making plays. I think Ace is the player that had the most success with that. trying to get on towards Seros in that top side, trying to force him into that really awkward play, which did end up with that huge turnaround fight in the Baron pit, right? Because you're looking at him trying to teleport bot lane, does get some. A lot of these players, DFM had everything. Oh gosh, have we?
Keep going.
You're back. Cool. We had a moment of freeze frame.
Okay, cool stuff. Well, no, it just seemed like every time that V3 were looking for a play, DFM would just had every piece in place at the right time to make sure that counterplay was even more potent.
And I think to use your point at the end there to really emphasize how much that happened, Syros in the Baron pit initialize. The biggest bait of V3 going in, going, hey, we can find Syros all on his own. We're going to be able to get a kill here. We might be able to turn it into something. Nope. Multiple members of V3 die, and the hugest Ziggs ult comes out and does, it feels like 3k damage across multiple members.
Yeah, the thing is, this was V3 trying to make a play onto an isolated laner.
It felt like a bit like a Hail Mary almost, right?
The thing is, it was a Hail Mary, but it was the Hail Mary to make. Like, it was the option they had. It nearly worked. Seros is caught completely off guard by the Empress Divide coming through. He then flashes the death sentence and satchels into the Baron pit, and that time bought. He's even hit by the Mega Inferno, not Mega Inferno, the Super Mega Death Rocket. I managed to get it right this time. As he's going over the wall, so like Hollow even aims that right, and it's just not enough. And V3 at this point is like, well, what more do we need to do to get a damn kill? And they finally try to get it, but at this point, DFM have collapsed back round through their own V3's red side jungle and run down the remaining members. And Seros buys so much time and pulls so much damage by throwing his own ult out that it's a little bit late. And the thing is, that's not even with V3 making a bad play. The only thing that maybe could have gone better is Reiner predicting the flash. That's about all you could hope for there for the death sentence.
I mean, Nomera, is there anything a V3 could have done differently there?
Even if you get that kill, you probably lose the fight. I know that the turnaround damage from Ziggs was huge. It meant that Ace was out of that fight. I still think they lose it. Youthpon's too strong. Steel's too strong. You've used a lot of your tools already. You've used the Emperor's Divide. You don't get to protect your Azir after that point. Heck, he tries to teleport away and he dies anyway, right? I think that V3 just bit off more than they could chew. And speaking of them trying to make a play even that early into the game, that's kind of sad for the side of V3 because it seemed like, again, they were choked out of that game super early on.
Choked out early on, DFM doing what they do, and our janitors, and they clean up the rest of V3 Esports in a decisive victory over them. But gentlemen, we'll be able to find out if V3 Esports are able to lick their wounds and pick a victory up towards the end, or will Burning Core change the dime, wrap the script, and throw it in the trash can with the janitor himself of V3? We'll have to find out. Don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. That's our next matchup.